So here we are, episode 3. Welcome to the Conscious Endeavor.
Welcome.
Always here to talk about consciousness, reality, and all sorts of wild things. So today, actually, I did want to talk about that. I did want to kind of talk about just the nature of reality and our ability to tap into that, you know?
Yeah, you gotta elaborate on that for me. That's reality's
Yeah,
interesting.
so, well, what I'm just thinking is, as far as like, when we endeavor into science, when we endeavor even into spiritual practice, we always have these things of trying to understand who we are and how we interface with reality, right? So there's this kind of, I would start with a division between perception and what reality is at subject or at whole, right? So in that case, right, it's like, well, we could see, right? We see our eyes can see, I think it's 370 nanometers to 730 nanometers, right? Specific wavelengths, right? But there are more wavelengths than that, obviously, right? Ultraviolet, right, being above the color spectrum, sun gives off that, right? Then X-ray, gamma rays, microwaves even, right? So there's a larger spectrum, right, than we're aware of.
Yeah, they say that we're only able to see 1% of what is actually around us at all times. And that's why when we talk about spirits and densities and is it more dense than, we're more dense than these other, what we call angels, and angels go into angles of light. So let me not go down that route at this point.
I'd say things that are dense sink, right? So if we want to think that they're higher, theoretically, right, they would have to be less dense.
Yeah. And what's wild is when we talk about, reality, I'm just going to go in the sense of vision. It's interesting how our eyes are better than cameras that, like really capturing beauty.
Right.
Like cameras can never really capture the beauty of what reality is. And that's just, it's quite wild to me. And then we have some animals that like eagle vision, right? Like eagles can see flags from the sky. Well, they can just even see like a small little animal, which is really wild. I wonder how that works when we talk about our senses and what reality is, because there's also clairaudience, something in like the spiritual world. Like, I mean, I can like literally, when I connect in the, with doing readings for people, I don't necessarily always see things. I hear things. It's like they like,
interesting.
Yeah, they come into me. Like when I tap into like, someone's energy, I can hear things about their life. It's not like I see it, I hear it usually, which is really wild.
And this is a question, is it spoken or is it just like instant? Because I've had dreams, for example, where there's a concept just given to me, but it's like instantaneous, like the second. All of a sudden I understand a whole like backstory, like you're in a dream and all of a sudden this information is just there in your head.
It's that instant access. An example would be, I did a reading for a woman once, and it was her first time getting a reading, and the first thing, like, I was like, "Can I tap into your energy?" She said, "Yeah." And then her father's like, "I'm here. You need to let her know." And I said that, and she just started crying. She's like, "Oh my God, I've been having these dreams." And I was like, "Okay." And so I'm like, he's saying this and that, and it just went to this deep, deep space, and it was like, it's not information that I had in my head prior to connecting with her energy. So that is interesting. It's like it's like instant. It's just
I mean, access and permission, even. I mean, there might be some sort of unconscious process that's occurring when you do ask that and they do grant that to you. It's kind of like this instant potential connection.
Yeah, and that's also interesting. Is like when we talk about circling back to vision and reality, it's like at nighttime, right? You know how you're, let's say, in a dark space, your eyes will adapt after 15 minutes to the darkness so that you can see everything that's around you. And it's like, I don't know how that works, because it's like, does our vision actually just get stronger or?
If you want me to chime in there, that's definitely the rods and cones. There's two different types of cells in the eye. One is more sensitive to light than the other. Particularly photons, like particles of light will hit these cells, these rods and cones, and there's little molecules inside those cells that they get excited by the photons and they'll change shape, and that activates them. So in this case, also interesting to say and to point out too, that photons will actually, if a photon hits, like, let's say a molecule, right? Or let's even just say an atom. An atom, we know, is the nucleus, right, with the electron, right, the orbiting electron. But that electron can actually have closer and farther orbits, right? So it can actually change orbits. It can shoot out to a farther orbit or come closer to a orbit. And that's actually indicative of how much energy that atom has at the moment.
What is an example of that in layman's terms?
So when a photon is going to hit an atom,
Mhm.
right, its electron will actually jump to a higher orbital shell. It'll get farther away from the nucleus and orbit in a
Mm.
wider array. As it loses energy, it'll come down and orbit closer, right? So this occurs, and when that occurs, right, that's what induces all these
So,
photochemical effects in these eye cells.
so let's say for our listeners that aren't as well versed in
Mhm.
science, what would that look like in a reality situation? Like,
So for example, I mean, if we're talking about maybe sunlight hitting water, the
mhm,
water heats up in temperature, right? The
mhm,
temperature is indicative of the vibration of those molecules, right? Or of
mhm,
those atoms, right? So they just heat it up. It increases the amount of energy, right?
mhm,
To the point where if we think about solar panels even,
mhm.
right? The molecules that are in a solar panel, they have what's called the photoelectric effect. So they actually get excited by the photons hitting it, the light,
Mhm.
and electrons actually get released in this process. And that's how we create electricity, is from
Wow.
the release of those electrons,
Got it.
right?
So then, if someone is, let's say, so back to that darkness example, if they're like,
Hmm.
if you're sitting, let's say, in a forest, because we've all gone camping or something like that,
Right.
and then you're not able to see things. So what is going on in the eyes when stuff starts to become more visible?
Right.
Is it our eyes are projecting, or is there energy coming towards?
Well, there's always energy coming towards you, right?
Okay.
There's always energy coming in. There's always light coming in, even though
Mm,
it's. But again, there's certain sensitivities. The rods are less technically less sensitive to light because they're in higher aspects of light. They're for higher acuity
mhm,
and they're for better. They have much better color vision because there's three different types of cones, and that's how
mm,
we get color vision.
mm,
If you're colorblind, for example, you're missing. You probably have 2 out of 3 of those cones rather
mhm,
than that. Rods happen to be more sensitive to light.
mm,
And it takes a bit for those rods essentially to warm up,
mm.
which is what we call the rod cone break. So
Gotcha.
as the cones, right, they only have a certain amount of sensitivity that they can have for light. As they come down, as the amount of light goes down, right, they're kind of perceptive. They can adjust a little bit,
Mm,
right? But then after a certain threshold of darkness, right, the rods actually have to kick on, and they take about, I think it's 8 minutes is where this rod cone break. The 8 minutes
mm.
mark is where the rods become more active than the cones do, and that's why it takes a minute.
All right, so now we know 8 minutes in the forest in the dark, your eyes will adjust and you'll be able to see better. It's that
Yeah,
night
yeah, yeah, yeah.
vision.
Yeah, yeah. 8 minutes is actually where the crossover is to
Mm,
where rods become more active than cones.
mhm,
And then you'll continue to adjust about 15, 20 minutes or
mm.
so is where it takes the full amount for the rods to become fully active. But
And that's also interesting is like I know that there's techniques my dad used to tell me about to sharpen your vision, candle lights, like staring at a
interesting.
candle. And they do talk about this in the some of these spiritual practices I heard of is that if you stare at the flame on a candle enough, you'll be able to see auras and energy. Like like you'll be
Mm,
able to see the auras and you'll
yeah.
see the little silhouettes and whatnot. So that
Yeah.
is some.
Yeah, I think your eyes can kind of desensitize or just like get used to a particular field of light and then kind of fine tune that spectrum.
Mm,
If you ever take like a picture, I don't know if anyone's like versed in like those sorts of editing programs. If you take a
mm,
picture, you can
mm,
cut the levels of it
mm,
like in and you'll see higher contrasts and things like that,
mm,
right? Because you're thinning that spectrum. Right. So it's kind of like when you look at the moon for a period of time, if you focus on the moon, right, you can actually end up seeing a halo around
mm,
it, right? Because your eyes start to adjust to that level, and then all of a sudden these other things come in. But also your peripheral vision, which is really
mm,
interesting, is actually better at picking up light sometimes
mm.
than the center of your vision, especially in a night sky.
Mm. So it's interesting. So, like, I guess if you stare at the moon long enough, you'll be able to see what's his name, Neil Armstrong on that mug. No, I'm just
The
kidding.
little American flag, right? That's
It's right
posted
there.
up
They
right
put it up
there.
there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah. So
Mm.
so circling back a little bit, right, with our vision with reality, again, that the tools that we have to interface into reality are very specific. Like you mentioned the eagle, for example, right?
Mm.
The eagle has really, really high acuity vision, but only because it needs it because
Mm.
it's at very high,
Mm.
heights, right? It needs to identify prey sources from an extremely high height,
Mm.
right? Look at different things. It has a really high acuity in order to identify those things. So it's
Mm.
interesting that we kind of have this evolutionary route.
Mm.
Depending on what we do as organisms and what we do as animals, kind of
Mm.
influences the way we end up interfacing with reality or influencing our perception of
Mm.
reality.
It's interesting you bring that up because, like, the primordial or just the primitive man. It's there's a lot about that. And I know I'm gonna circle a little bit from vision, but it has to do with senses and our human capabilities. There's this game called Assassin's Creed. I'm sure you guys might be familiar with it. They showed these guys jumping from building to building, doing parkour, and then they made one about this native. Yeah, shot of parkour, right? They started doing this Native American episode. I mean, game, and in that he runs through the trees. I just saw a video of Instagram of a guy actually literally hopping from tree to tree to tree, like, and they
Right.
showed him do like it's
Right.
legit.
Yeah, I mean, it
Yeah.
makes sense.
And then it also brings up when we're talking about senses,
Mhm.
when the skyscrapers were built in America, they would hire Native Americans to do any of these like
No
construct
way.
because they have less sense of fear of heights because
Wow.
it's already something that's been, they've
Yeah.
conquered.
Essentially bred out of them in a way, yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting too, because I mean, evolution on a large scale, but also like on that more minute scale, whereas like behaviors and adaptations that occur within lifetimes and then pass down,
Mhm.
right, through these things. So it's also like if you're climbing, I actually saw a video of somebody climbing trees and he was climbing barefoot. He was climbing buildings and trees and all sorts of stuff completely barefoot.
Yeah.
And it's like, the more you do that, the more you actually get your skin on rock
Mhm.
and on these like harder surfaces, the skin will thicken,
Yeah.
right? The more you kind of scrape it, it grows thicker. Everything that you're doing is given a neural response.
Mhm.
Those neurons will modulate, right? Things will change and adapt. So it's like, you get exposed to heights a certain amount of time. And in what psychology we call extinction,
Mhm.
right? A behavior, if you have enough exposure to it, if there's a fear,
Mhm.
that fear will become extinct, right?
Mhm.
In the sense that if you expose yourself over it multiple times,
Mhm.
eventually the body, if nothing goes wrong,
Mhm.
eventually the body will extinct the fear response because it thinks it's no longer necessary.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Which, also makes sense to why we have certain groups of humans that have not lived in like city-like vibrations, and they're
Mm,
able to do amazing things. Like when we look at some of these natives that are still around, they're in these primitive cultures, they still are going through the jungle barefoot. You know what I'm
right.
saying? And they're still it's not affecting them. We go in there, it's like our bodies have shifted, our frequency is a little different. Where the way we adapt to nature is different versus
Yeah.
these people. It's like it's just innate in them. They're like, all right, come on, let's go, and they'll run through a jungle. Like us, we'll probably get hit with a little bit of fear. Where do I stand? We'll lose our footing, whatnot.
Yeah. But even your skin is less tough. I
Mhm,
mean, again, exposure plays a huge role in that adaptation process, right? So
mhm,
if they've been doing that for years or for example, their entire lives,
mhm,
they got thick skin on the
mhm,
bottom of their feet and they're used to those sensations. Their body has adapted
mhm,
physically, sick, thicker skin, probably less response to pain
mhm.
also in those areas. City folk, step on something. You might step on like one root
Oh,
of a tree and be like,
yeah.
oh my God, right?
Yeah.
So it might freak you out. But I actually have a friend of mine
Mm,
who's training that, who's actually now going on
wow.
hikes, taking off her shoes,
Mm.
and just going on these hikes and trying to, toughen up her feet and, make it a whole process.
Wow. Wow. And these senses, I'm so fascinated by humanity, right? Like when we think about what people do in different parts of the world and how unique our body is as far as like adaptation. I do think the human body is like probably the greatest body ever made because we're capable of doing so much, compared to the rest of the animal kingdom as far as building and creating,
Right.
and tapping with other animals. Like if you think about snake charmers in India. You know what I'm saying? Where did they pick that up from? Like,
Right.
how did they have this sense that, yo, I'm gonna get a flute and it's gonna make the snake dance? You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? And then they're like, some of them, they don't get poisoned at all. You know what I'm saying? Their body's adapted to poison.
Yes.
And then,
Yeah. Big thing.
yeah, and then also like elephant herders in Thailand. How is it that these guys are like over here? I don't know if you guys heard of Tony Jaa. Tony Jaa is this martial artist. He did Ong Bak. This guy is there's a video of him running across a stampede of elephants. Like he's like running on the top of them.
Wow.
No stunts. This is just legit, and you guys can all look this up. And it's to show that like our senses, our reality is shaped by our conditioning. So,
100%.
so if you have fear will consume you. But if you don't have, and I'm not saying you shouldn't have fears, but at the end, on the other side of fear, what is it? It's just greatness.
Mhm.
It's like you conquering something,
Right.
and seeing people do these type of things around the world. It should be something that we look at as something that we can possibly do. I'm not telling you to go do it, but I'm saying to understand that there's this thing called critical mass, where if one person is able to do something, then the rest of the collective can do it. And if you look at that from a perspective of when I was a child, no one ever heard of a 4 minute mile. Now you got
Right.
people breaking the 4 minute mile.
Hmm.
I met a guy who he's a part of a group of people. They get together, they run 100 miles. They run, not like,
Wow.
you know what I'm saying? This is all legit happening.
Yeah.
Another example of critical mass is my son knew how to use an iPad before he knew how to walk, talk, or any of that. And it's just the collective as we start doing things that are extraordinary. If one person's able to do it, the rest of the people are able to catch on and start doing it. That's why you're seeing a lot of records being broken all over the world
Right.
when it comes to human feats.
Yeah, I think in terms of human potential too, it's like, they certain person becomes an example, and then it
Mm,
becomes this idea that it's like, okay, well, now we know that that is possible,
mm,
right? And once that, it's because it's really, it breaks belief,
mm,
right? Something insane happens and people go, wow, I can't believe that occurred, right? And
mm,
it's a lot of times these limiting beliefs,
mm,
right, that hold our potential in line. But all these things with animal interactions and all these sorts of other things, I think, is just like over hundreds of thousands of years that the human form, I mean, the current anatomy of the human brain, I think, has
mm,
existed for, close to a million years around that, right? But,
mm,
thinking that civilization, I mean, if we think about even from year zero, allegedly,
mm.
you
Whatever
know,
that is.
whatever that means, because we're in the year 2022. Meanwhile, China right now is in the year 4,700 something,
Wow.
right? Because their calendar goes back farther. Their
Mm,
Chinese New Year is in February,
mm,
right? So they're in the year 4,000 something, or
mm.
they're in the, they're in the future, whatever. Egypt allegedly, the height of that civilization, 3,500 years before zero.
Mm.
Right. So then, and in the maximum, that's the maximum as far as we believe that like this civilized society could have existed, and that's about 5,000 years.
Yeah,
Now think about 100,000.
mm,
Think about 200,000, and all the multiple combinations of what's possible, even in our individual lifetimes. But
mm.
now think about how many lifetimes have really occurred along those, spectrums. It's really wild.
It's interesting. I've heard a lot. There's a guy named Graham Knowles. I don't know if you've heard of him, but he talks about the pyramids are close to 12,000 years old. They go back
Mm,
to our last ice age because there are water markings on the Sphinx. And the last time there was water in that part of
right.
the world was an ice age. And then, I don't want to get into like if we've been lied to or if there's a control on what,
Hmm.
when things were done. But I want to circle back to you said something really interesting. Well, you always say something interesting, by the way, but the idea of reality versus beliefs.
Right.
That is something that it plays a huge role. Like if you believe something, it becomes your reality.
Hmm.
And that's why when you have limiting beliefs, it is a bit of like you're limiting yourself and putting like I don't want to say a curse on yourself, but if you believe something's not
Say
possible,
it.
and yeah, if you believe something's not possible,
Right.
then it's not going to happen for you, even if you see someone else do it. So it's really important to get out of your comfort zones, and that's how, as a species, we evolved is to really just push those boundaries. Push through things, push through like there's a culture I believe in the Philippines they go underwater spearfishing and they can stay underwater for like extended periods of time to where they can hunt underwater standing on rocks and like
Wow.
throw spears in the water like while they're in the
Wow.
water like and this all stuff you guys can look up but I just am so blown away by that and
Yeah.
if you just constantly watch things like these news channels you're not going to see what amazing things people are doing all day every day.
Yeah,
I
it's
think it's
definitely curated,
yeah.
for a specific audience or specific narrative.
And I think social media, people talk about how bad it is and this and that, but I actually believe that without social media, we wouldn't be seeing a lot of the things that we're seeing now amongst our species,
Mm.
amongst animals, amongst countries, amongst places. Like everyone's traveling to places all over the world now that I never knew of when I was a child because the only way I found out about things when I was younger was like National Geographic, and National Geographic was just a couple
Right.
of pictures of some animals.
Yeah.
Now we got species that we didn't even knew existed
Yeah.
back like 20 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, there's insects too. I mean, insects being the hugest
Mm,
or the largest, I guess, kingdom, right,
mm,
of any organism. And they discover new insects like all the time. Like every year, there's
yeah,
just like new insects just pop because we just like, I mean, how many people are like looking around, just staring, looking for new bugs?
yeah,
And then even if you find one, I mean, if you're not an expert in bugs,
yeah.
how would you know that hasn't been seen before? How would you know that that's new?
Mm,
For example. So it's really interesting.
yeah, I mean,
That comes
and
about.
yeah, you remember that culture of people, they have those really long necks.
Yes.
Like what is, what I'm saying?
Yeah,
Wow,
yeah,
like
yeah.
what is that? That's so
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting too, like the way that the society and information is exchanged now. I think there was one person, I think it was a sociologist, talking about the theory of how it's changed. We've changed from kind of communal creatures
Mhm.
in a way to network-based creatures, especially how we connect now
Mhm.
is mostly in networks. And it's no longer in like, for example, like, you go home, you might not know who your neighbor is, right? Like
Mm.
you might not talk to the people on your street. Whereas, 50 years ago, you knew everyone in
Everyone's
town,
yeah.
and there was town meetings, and there was localization, and there was communal living. But now it's all network based. You
Mm.
sit in your house and you network, or you meet other people who essentially have similar interests to you,
Mm.
right? And then all of a sudden now you start connecting with those people, and now it's like, okay, you're connected to this community. Someone living in your household connects to other communities that you don't connect to.
Mm.
And now we're all in this kind of network based living, which is good and bad. I mean, it
Mm.
allows us to, exchange information, especially for the scientific community, especially,
Mm.
you can talk to somebody from the other side of the world who's doing the same research as
Mm.
you. You might be doing very rare research and no one around you is doing that, right? So it enables these kinds of communications, right? So there's a positive there, but also there's this fear of everyone kind of sitting in an echo chamber. You're talking to all the people who agree with you.
Yeah.
And this might even lead to why, I mean, I would say modern time America, where you have a lot of people at odds with each other because they're really, they're very rarely having conversations outside of their networks, and they're not having uncomfortable conversations about disagreements and about those sorts of things. And
Yeah, that is something that, I was just speaking about this past weekend. It's like when you say modern America, right? It's really
Mhm.
wild to think that if you watch Hollywood, your idea, I'm sorry, watch movies, your idea, most people's idea of America would be something across between Los Angeles, Miami, New York City,
Right.
you know. But like you go outside of New York City and you're just in upstate New York, it's a different country. It's not the
Yeah.
flow is so different.
Right.
It looks different, the air is different, the technology is different. You don't see these buildings. Like we really like I think that has a lot to do with just the curation of, media and TV, right? Like
Right. What the narrative is.
yeah,
Yeah.
like, and that's why when they talk about like, and I'm not trying to go deep into this, but I just want to bring that up. Is like when we talk about political issues, there are people who do not agree with a lot of things that get passed into laws, and it's
Hmm.
really interesting that we always say like, it's like this minority group. Well, I really think it's a majority group outside of major cities in any state.
Right.
It is a different vibration than what we believe like city life is. Most
Right.
people think they'll go into a town like maybe a 5 square mile town. They'll call that a city. For
Right.
us, we're near New York City. That's the city. That's what we know. We know that vibration. But
Yeah.
other parts of America, they're not
Right.
experiencing this New York City
Yeah. Well, the
life.
hard part is, especially when it comes to things like voting and policy
Yeah.
making and all that stuff, it's like, well, yeah, they have different, obviously urbanization versus like, suburb or ruralization is way, way different.
Mm.
There's a difference, I think, even in an urban area due to the amount of interactions that are
Mm.
happening per day because of the amount of people. It's like the society, the individuals, the culture itself is changing faster than outside because of the amount of interactions that are
Yeah.
happening within.
It's
And
like a
when it
different era.
comes, yeah, and when it comes to, voting and things like that, it's like, you know, um, upstate New York, you have a lot of people on a different wavelength. But even like if we think about the island of Manhattan,
Mm.
there's 8 million people on that island.
Yeah.
Like 8 million people. How much land do you need to encapsulate in upstate New York to find 8 million people? You
Yes,
know what I
that's
mean?
wild.
So
That's wild. You
in
might not
terms,
even.
right, in terms of that, it's like it's kind of hard, and where that's where it sets the balance or sets the scales here, in a really interesting way, and how that push and pull occurs between those cultures.
And then when we talk about that, because like reality is something that you brought up. It's like when we're showing other countries, when they talk about other countries, and they're like, well, hey man, they don't have these rights over there. Thing is, they don't have the same issues over there. They don't have the same what is it, curation of certain news and certain like
Right.
culture. It's not like, and that's the thing that I'm learning more of is like I used to judge other cultures and people by, do they speak English? Do they do this? Do they do that? In reality, everything is the way it should be as far as like cultures and stuff. And once you like kind of like accept everybody, your reality shifts. It's no longer that you're trying to control everything. You just surrender to it and understand that different people, different walks of life, no one has to agree with you. You know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
But you do need to be understand what is your reality. And that has a lot to do with the
Right.
self.
Yeah, I think also being in an urban area, you have to be more open and tolerant to other people's way of life, because
Mm,
you live within close proximity of people who may have like extremely different lifestyle than you do.
mm,
So there's like kind of a more, there's a higher incentive for people to be open-minded and also for people to be challenged by those ideas. For example, if you live in a rural area, you may never encounter those individuals.
mm,
You may never have a coworker who literally has a completely opposite religious belief than you. You
mm,
might have this kind of homogenous, or everyone's, the same type of religion or race or whatever,
mm,
right? You know what I mean? In our area, we have that kind of high diversity. And to be honest with you, that's one of the things that I love about this area,
mm.
right? Because it's like, that high diversity leads for people to have very highly dynamic conversations,
Mhm.
allow them to be a little bit more open-minded, and echo into those kinds of things.
Yeah, that is what I do love about the city. Like I had an experience where I went to Utah
Ooh,
and I had no idea.
beautiful.
Yeah,
Beautiful landscape.
beautiful landscape, but I had no
Yeah.
idea that. And I don't have anything against anybody. I'm just saying, like, I didn't know how the Mormon Church really rolls. I've always knew about them. I saw a couple growing up in Michigan that would come into the hospital that I used to work at, but like I didn't know that there's these rules and regulations that they have in place, when you go out to restaurants or bars and like, a limiting things are metered over there. And, I mean, I understand the logic behind it, but you would not know that's part of America because when you look at what we're used to, there's like,
Yeah.
I don't want to say there's no rules, but, it definitely feels like it's
Right.
more like lawless.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely think the interesting thing is that nationalism
Mm,
is an idea,
mm,
right? Like how you identify your country, how you identify with your country, what you think your country is,
yeah.
right? For example, somebody may come, let's say, to New York City from Bangladesh and say, I love America,
Yeah.
right? But it's like, you're only in homie, you're only in New York City, right?
Yeah.
But then, we have someone, let's say in Missouri, who thinks that I love America, right? They have a whole different, when they say that word, America, right? They have a whole different, ideology,
Mm,
or whatever sort of ideas they're associating with that are completely different from, someone else. And I think getting to the root of that, and how I would say is like that the root of democracy,
mm.
even in and of itself, is defining those principles, and then trying to move further with that. And
Yeah.
there's different social issues that exist in those
Oh,
areas,
for sure.
especially.
I mean, we talk about foreign countries. I don't know if anyone here has been to West Virginia, but it is really different. Like I think there's
There might be somebody from West Virginia listening right now. So how you doing?
hey, we're over here just trying to bridge, you know what I'm saying? We're all uniting, we're coming back together as one nation. But like I think there's one school for 50 miles. Like,
Wow.
it's like some wild
Wow.
number like that.
Yeah.
And there are parts of it that, they say like parts of America are actually in worse condition as far as from an economic standpoint, clean water standpoint, than
Right.
other places that we look at and that we say like
Yeah.
they're
I
horrible.
mean, look at Flint, Michigan. They
Yeah.
went 2 or almost at least 2 years without clean drinking water.
I don't know if they
And it
still have it.
you know what's really weird is that politicians in the area, they didn't do anything about it. The government didn't do anything about it. You know who fixed it?
Who? The people?
Elon Musk.
Oh wow. Wow.
So when Elon Musk was on good old Joe Rogan's podcast,
Yeah.
he was smoking marijuana,
Yeah.
and he had some backlash from his stock holders that he was out of line and blah blah blah. So I think at that point is when he stepped down as CEO from one of his companies, and he actually ended up donating a couple $1 million to Flint to
Wow.
fix part of the infrastructure problem, which is actually really insane to think that our governments aren't doing these things, that it comes down to these capitalists who are basically apologizing and
Yeah.
doing good things for the community in order to kind of benefit their own public image,
Yeah.
right? You got to ask yourself, what's wrong with the establishments of government? Where are your tax dollars going, et cetera, et cetera? But, you know, in order to feed basic necessity, water should be a basic necessity, right?
Yeah.
And that should be something given by a municipality. We all pay 20, sometimes more percent of your income.
Yeah.
Those things should be fixed and available,
I'm from Detroit, and the city tax is a lot more. There's a city tax that's more
Right.
expensive than like living in. And so
Right.
just
It's
think about
property tax
Yeah.
as well. Yeah.
So you living in Detroit, you're paying more to live in Detroit, which is not as well, as other cities. You know what I'm saying? Like, so it's wild to think that, and you're not getting, that quality of water. Water itself is something that, we should have the infrastructure for it because it doesn't take much, but An example is we've sent, I don't want to get into too much politics. I keep saying that, right? We sent over billions of dollars to this country in Eastern Europe right now, where we haven't spent that money on our own infrastructure, on our
Right.
own infrastructure. Like you're telling me these taxpayer dollars are going over to support these things, which brings me back to nationalism. You know, when things are curated, you don't, it's like the average person does not challenge what is going on. And that's why they formulate opinions on things that they do not know about. So when
Right.
we talk about, oh yeah, we got to go to war, for what? For what? Like, what is the benefit of
Right.
it truly? You know what I'm
Also,
saying?
why is that a solution?
Yeah,
It's like, okay, well, something's going wrong, so let's go kill other people.
yeah,
I don't
yeah,
understand. It's like, okay, how do we,
yeah.
jump the gap? And a lot of war
Mm,
is, and a lot of the justification for war is like, well, if we don't kill them, they're going to kill us,
yeah,
right? The whole reason we went to the Iraq war was because we
yeah,
believed that they had weapons of mass destruction, proved out to be incorrect
yeah,
information, false information that was given by our own government. We went on an assumption that they had weapons that were going to kill us, so we had to go there and kill them. And it's kind of like this, and the same thing with the initiation of the Cold War in the
mm,
70s between the Russia and the US. It was
mm,
like, well, if they develop a bomb, we have to have a bomb. And then, and then the armaments just kept going up and up. And it's like, well, if they have the better technology, we have to get the stronger technology. And it
mm,
just became this, again, the arms race, quite literally,
yeah,
and it's all on this idea that, well, if we don't do it first, somebody else, the big bad guy, the boogeyman will do it first
yeah,
if we don't do it. And we're the
yeah,
good guys, right?
yeah. I
So it
mean,
becomes this, but it's, and in a way, and this is interesting to just echo on the idea of our perception of the outside world, the perception of the external.
yeah,
Because if we're not at peace with ourselves, if we have fear in ourselves, a lot of times you're going to externalize that fear and say, well, this is the problem. And because I have fear,
mm.
we have to go out and go get the bad guy and et cetera, et cetera. And then the Fire Nation attacks.
Yeah, I was just watching Avatar
All the
this past
people,
weekend. It was crazy. I was watching my
all
son.
the
That's
people are
sick.
gonna
You know,
echo
and
that.
that's even wilder is just to really think about it when we talk about other countries and we just say like horrible things. And listen, I am born and raised in America, so I don't know any other country as home as this, but home is where the heart is. Um, Russia has banned GMO foods, so
Right.
there's no genetically modified foods in that whole country, and here we are with this. We used to be the leaders in education, whatnot, and we're not doing these type of things. We're still going through with this, GMOs like not banned here. And it's interesting.
Yeah.
Russia, this, horrible country that people, I don't think they're horrible. I'm just saying that's what people describe it as, at least on the media.
hmm
They're taking care of their people.
Well, the media again is going to be kind of one-sided in how they
Yeah.
define an issue and in how they understand. Especially, I mean, when we say big bad Russia, quote unquote, it's because well they've been our rival in terms of the space race, in
Right.
terms of the arms race, in terms of all these other things, and
Mm,
they have a dictatorship. So we try to paint them in a bad light, but we paint them in a bad light because it allows us to incentivize war against them,
mm,
right? So there's a psychology to war in and of itself. We have to paint the picture, and there's a lot of studies on the psychology of war, how we have to dehumanize
yeah.
the enemy, right? So, like, a rough example here, but talking about Hitler and the Jews, right? They had actually had this idea where Hitler had to dehumanize Jewish people and say,
Mm,
well, you have to look at those individuals as less than human to justify killing them,
mm,
because it's hard for an individual to kill another individual. But if we degrade that individual and say, well, they're an animal, they're
yeah.
this, they're that, they're whatever. However, we dehumanize a person because it makes war easier. It makes more justifiable,
Mm,
right? And it comes down again to the perception of how we define other people, how we define other individuals. If we look at each other as divine holy spirits who hold resonance, who hold information, who hold a piece of our evolutionary past,
mm,
and we're a piece into the puzzle of this cosmic mystery,
mm.
how are you now going to destroy another human being, to destroy another culture, even of that? You know how many ancient sites in Iraq were destroyed during the radicalization of that area? It's really unfortunate because there's statues that are thousands of years old that
Mm,
key us into what our history is and what our,
mm,
humanity is. On a very deep level, and the fact that our modern egoic conflicts are destroying a
mm.
piece of our, history, I think is horrible.
They did that in Afghanistan too with this big giant statue of Buddha. And the
hmm
interesting part where there were people who were just living on that side of the cave, it was on the side of a giant like mountain, I should say, and they're living on the side of it. but they had to move. That thing got destroyed. And you know, it's just also like, how do these type of people come in place, right? They, you know, my from what I understand, what I've seen is they come into place because of policies driven from other places. You know, these people weren't originally in power. They were put in power by certain individuals. Where do they get these weapons from? Like, you know what I'm saying?
Hmm.
There's not places in Iraq and Afghanistan that make weapons. These weapons are coming from
Other
other
sources.
sources. You know what
Right,
I'm saying?
right, right,
And that's just that's the bottom line. So like, if
right.
we really want to stop things, maybe we
Yeah.
should stop things by stop creating things.
I mean, yeah, arms manufacturers exist in particular countries, and a lot of times these arms manufacturers end up funding both sides of war. So
Yeah.
technically, they have a financial incentive for war to occur. And this is probably one of the worst things ever because, I mean, in terms of profit and capitalism, we essentially go for what is profitable, what works, what will create profit,
Mm,
right? And therefore, there's no incentive to humanitarianism to benefit the human race.
mm,
The only incentive becomes profit in capital systems, right?
mm,
So if our government in a way could find ways to incentivize humanitarian efforts, right, give tax cuts to humanitarian, which I'm,
mm,
I'm pretty sure do exist, right, these are good things that we want to do, but if you have a financial incentive and your financial incentive is something that is, you know, detrimental to the human form, I think that industry in and of itself is not a good industry, you
yeah.
know.
What's interesting, you know, they call it the Department of Defense, right? Before that, I don't know what year it was. Don't quote me. I'm not a, you know, one of those guys bookworms with this, but it used to be called the Department of War.
Mm,
You know what I'm saying? But
mhm,
those subtle little things that they shift and
right,
they change the names to, you know, justify the Department of Defense.
right,
It's not really, I don't know how it's defensive. I can understand the concept of it, but if no one's capable of coming to our land, which is all the way over here, and these, you know what I'm saying?
right.
Why is it,
Well, that must mean the Department of Defense is doing a really good job.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
We got invaded, you know, no, let me stop. Let me stop.
Right. But, you know, I mean, in a sense, there is a psychology again to how we define these
Mm,
terms, how we paint these pictures.
mm,
Again, I don't think really war is always the answer. I think that there are a lot of times problems within the infrastructures of particular countries, which make them then agitated, makes the
mm,
individuals agitated. You know,
mm,
class inequality, for example, may make a particular class agitated. An entire country
mm.
may go into economic hardship and then therefore blame a particular group, another country,
Yeah.
right? And it's like, well, it's the other country's fault because they're limiting this resource and that and that. So all of human conflict and all these wars really come from a lack of resources, right? Which I think echo in a way of that scarcity mindset,
Mm.
right? Those sorts of things where we don't, you know, we're afraid again of our own basic necessities not being met.
Yeah, man, there's so many things that you just went into. I'm just like, I don't know where to go. So, like, I was just watching Avatar and they're talking about to cheat a cheater is still cheating, right?
Uh,
So, like,
Interesting.
war on terror, war on
Right.
terror, right?
Okay.
And then, you know, as far as resources go, they say if Texas was as densely populated as New York City, you could fit the whole world's population into Texas,
Hmm.
which is like really interesting. When we talk about resources, what are resources that we truly need? We have oil in our country. We have a reserve that we can
Hmm.
tap in anytime we want. We have fruits and vegetables growing in our country. We have farms in our country. We have everything that a human race needs growing in our country. You know, what we might not have is, you know, some of these cell phone minerals that are found in Africa. I mean, like some of these, you know,
Right.
but other than that,
Lithium batteries, for
lithium, but
example.
do we need more? We have so many,
Right.
right? I'm saying,
Also, the problem is a lot of redundancies, I think, in human culture. Like, why do we literally have to be inside a building from like 9 to 5 like, why do we have to go to this building, especially when 90% of your work for a lot of these offices is literally in front of a computer? Why do you
yeah.
have to be at a physical location anymore? You know what I mean? It doesn't make sense. And in reference to the reduction
Mm,
in greenhouse gases, like during COVID, when a
yeah.
lot of these businesses went remote, the first 6 months of that shutdown,
Yeah.
the ozone layer went back to levels it was in the 80s.
Animals came out on the
Yeah, but
streets.
it's like crazy
Yeah.
to think we
Yeah.
stopped a little. We not even stopped. We like limited human activity
Yeah.
for 6 months, and the ozone recovered 40 years,
Yeah.
right? And this, I think, also talks about the resiliency of the planet and
Mm,
like against these human activities. We really think that we're such, you know, wide generators of global warming, and we do
Yeah.
contribute to it. However, I think the planet is much more resilient than we lead on, but we do need to live more sustainably. We need to have lifestyles that kind of, I mean, even for mental health,
Mm.
that are just more grounded and less about, this just ideological warfare that's kind of going on. I mean,
Well, it brings us back to reality. What was reality for me? Let's say 20 before COVID, I was working in an office, and my day consisted of 9 to 10 hours just in a corporate building with no sunlight. I mean, there was
hmm
like windows in some
right,
floors, right? But
right,
like, and then you're just being constantly in front of a computer. So by the time you get home, you're not getting any type of, you're not getting any sun, which is vital for humans, which we all know
yeah.
now, right? I mean, I know people know have known forever, but like it's more common knowledge now.
Yeah. And the
The
science is understood now that the
Yeah,
metabolic pathways of vitamin D and all this stuff there's more science on it now,
yeah,
because we need that intellectual justification. A lot of people, right? A lot of ideas that were at one point like hippie,
yeah.
right? Now there's like, oh wow, there's actually science behind that, and that actually is something that is beneficial to the human form, like something you intrinsically feel. Oh
Yeah.
wow, that feels good for me, right? A lot of times there
Mm.
are scientific basis to those things, but it's just the framing.
Yeah, and it's like what is that life look like? You know what I'm saying? That reality. So the reality is you're here, you're working your 9 to 5, and then you're going home. By the time you get home, you're a little fatigued. You might try to go to the gym or something. Like when are you getting any exposure to something else? By the time you're at the weekend, you're weakened. You know what I'm saying? That's why they call it
Mm,
weeks, right? Like,
mm.
there's this whole thing, days of the week, because your days meant, but I don't want, we can go
Right,
down that route,
right.
but reality is what you make of it is where I'm at right now. And if you're, it all comes back to self. Because when you're tapped in with when you go into your heart space, whether it's through meditation, whether it's through grounding in nature, which is like putting your feet on bare grass for like 15-20 minutes,
Right.
you're able to tap back into the divine. And the divine is not meant to be confound into some sort of like matrixy system. I don't know,
Mhm.
but it's just, how are you checking in with what you really want, what you really need? If your reality is coming from TV, music that's not yours, radio, the newspaper, that's all controlled in some sort of way. I mean, independent artists aren't as that big, and like the mainstream media, mainstream news, mainstream music, it's all curated for you. It's all
Right.
manufactured for you.
Yeah.
So how are you tapping into reality? Your reality is being shaped by other people if that's the route you're going. So
Correct.
it's important to take time and energy to go into self. And what are some techniques that you utilize to go into self?
For me, it's just like a lot of intrinsic awareness techniques. I mean, you can move awareness around your body.
Mm,
You can become aware of sounds in the room. You can try to listen to the farthest away sound you can hear,
mm,
right? And you're displacing your awareness and your attention. And in this regard, you're also training your awareness and your intention. And the more that you get aware of those things, there's neural pathways again that are going to be reinforced. As we know, what fires together wires together,
yeah,
right? So the more that you exercise these neural pathways, the more they're stronger they're going to get, right? So there's a lot of these intrinsic practices also, I think, help with emotional regulation, because if you're aware of how your energy shifts, if like you may experience an emotion after doing a months long, maybe daily practice of these intrinsic awareness exercises, all of a sudden when you actually have an emotional arise
mhm,
later, now you're all of a sudden aware of how that emotion moves energy around your body. You can then utilize that, become aware of that. Then you can, as the ancients say, transmute.
mm,
You can move that energy. You can be aware of that energy. You can now facilitate that energy between you and the person you're conversing with, come to a point of harmony, right? And then there's endless. And at this point, we're only scratching the surface of maybe physical and social effects,
yeah,
not even to touch on the fact that there are, as we talk about the perception of reality, there are other higher modulating, frequencies that I do believe that are affected by, these sorts of things, coming into harmony with yourself,
mm,
um, with sound waves, with physics, with just wave functions in general,
mm,
there's something called constructive interference and destructive interference. So constructive interference would be like when two waves work together, they amplify each other's energy.
mm,
If there are two conflicting energy sources, right, they can actually cancel each other. If one's going up while the other is going down, they'll cancel each other. That is zero,
mm,
right? So a good analogy you can use there is actually a swing,
mm,
right? There's a certain, spot where you need to push the swing, right? Because if you push it as it's coming back to you,
mm,
smack, right?
Yeah.
But you want to, as it's, beginning to go back out, that's when you do the push, right? And this is an example of something, waves being in phase with each other, right? They're constructively interfering,
Mm.
right? They're combining and they're amplifying each other, right? So in my regard, I do believe that there's this kind of constructive interference with the personal energy, that when we come into this personal harmony, right, we actually are amplifying our own energy states,
Mm.
right, by doing this. I think it's really interesting.
And then with the, just music, waves,
Right.
there's thing about sound bowl healing. There's these, vibrations, how to like balance yourself out. When you listen to certain music, whether it's through the radio, whether it's through the TV, whether it's through like whatever audio device you're using, it's at a different frequency than what is originally recorded, which can cause distortion. So it's important to kind of, they talk about 432 hertz, they talk about 444, they talk about 528. These are frequencies that they consider to be natural frequencies, I believe, or is it I forget the word, but solfeggio, you know what I'm talking
Well,
about?
solfeggio is
Yeah.
actually a scale structure.
Yeah.
Solfeggio is just the do, re, mi, fa, sol,
Oh,
right?
okay.
Solfeggio is a scale pattern. When we come down, if we want to break this down a little bit, 432 hertz was the initial hertz frequency set by Pythagoras.
Shout out to
I
Pythagoras.
think did we talk about this
Yeah.
last
Just a little
episode?
bit we
Right,
talked
right,
about
right.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's a tuning standard. Again, Pythagoras created the 12-tone musical scale. He also set the center, essentially, for lack of a better term, he set the center pitch as A, which was 432 hertz, right? Which he claimed resonated with organic matter the best. We did change that standard to 440 hertz
Yeah.
in the 1950s, post World War II. So there's something going on with the natural ability of frequency. We're talking here about the tuning of instruments.
Yes.
So 432 is the tuning of instruments, but then let alone we do have the quality of music itself. Now we can tune those instruments to particular frequencies, but then it's like, what do you choose to do with that instrument? I think is really important. And to echo here, what do you choose to do with your body? Because your body, at the end of the day, is an instrument, right? So how do you tune your instrument? Right. And this is it may be Om, or the importance of mantras, right? Om, and coming into fundamental frequencies which exist in ourselves, creating that constructive interference, adding to the energy we have, and again, coming into states of harmony. When things are in phase with each other, they work easier. It's less energy to, I feel like, control that system. If the system is chaotic, it's very hard to control that system in a way. And talking about the interface with the human body here, right? How can I control my emotions, for example, if my mind is so chaotic, right? If my mind is chaotic and giving me all these other post scenarios, going into different timelines and saying, well, what if this happened, and what if that happened, what if this and what if that, right? But if you calm the water, right? If you relax the waters, there's a really good Zen saying that says the still water reflects the best. Right? If you see a very calm pond, it reflects a perfectly still image. But the second there's ripples in that pond, that image becomes distorted. And it's kind of an analogy, right, about like how we see reality, right? If we are there's also sort of, turbulent waters of our emotions and our mind are not steady, we're not going to see a clear picture, right? So this is a part of why meditation is always about coming to the breath and relaxing, bringing the self down, right? Because then in that case, we now more accurately perceive reality and everything.
Back to reality, and that's the beauty of it.
Yeah.
That distort. So I know there's conflicting information about 432 versus 440. It's a big debate about it.
Right.
But if you look at the history of like who are the people behind when they made 440 hertz, when they agreed to that, make that the new standard, you can look at the name of the family. It's a renowned family, and they control quite a bit of things. But I'm gonna circle back to the 432. So the singing bowls, they have different frequencies. So as you just highlighted, it's about, coming back to calmer, shores or calmer waters, and our body has a vibration of its own. So when you get hit with these sound waves, we hit with any waves, but that's why it's important to get hit with natural waves, and natural waves come from natural places. Or these singing bowls are tuned to 432, and they help you come back to that vibration. They say that we are sound at some point. There's this whole theory about sound came first. And
First was the word.
Yeah.
Right.
There we go. Yeah. And it's important that when does and I'm gonna go in a little spiritual path. And here's like, when does one feel alive? If it really is, I think, or I feel, when you're heard and when you're seen and when you're heard is the most important, because we are sound. We have a song of enlightenment that we're here to share in this world. So it's important to express yourself. I mean, that's why we're doing this podcast, because
Mhm.
it's, I believe it's a calling to, like, express the knowledge that we've accumulated over time and share it with the collective. And sound bowls are amazing. Meditation's amazing. And how you said, just, feeling things out in your body, tapping in, just getting into that Zen space. We're all capable of doing that. And you should all, I mean, my opinion is that we should all take time or just put energy into trying it daily. If we can't do it daily, try it once every 2 days. If you can't do it once every 2 days, try it once every 3 days, et cetera, because there were so many people in this world that don't get an opportunity because, one, they're not educated on it, they're not made aware of it, that these are things that we could do. At some point, my reality consisted of sports, music, women, and just that lifestyle. There was no Zen time. I didn't even know what Zen. I thought it was corny. I'm like, dude, what is this guy doing over here in the
Mhm.
park doing some Tai Chi and stuff? Now I look at him like, yo, he's on the wave. You know what I'm
Mhm.
saying? He's feeling the wave. And when I look at other traditions, yoga, I used to be like, yo, it's kind of, I don't want to use that word, but it was just kind of
Mhm.
funny to me. I'm like, dude, I don't really like yoga.
Yeah.
But no, it's essential. Yoga to me is better than football because, hey,
Right.
yoga is actually balancing me out. Football, I can use it to, if I put a lot of effort into, kind of balance me out, but it's not really balancing out me holistically. Holistically, yoga it's an ancient technique that's been utilized since prior to modern religions or any of these religions.
Right.
And it's important for us to tap into these things. I'm not saying just find what your calling is to help you balance yourself out. We're all capable of that. So,
Yeah. I think it's really interesting too. It's funny because we're all at a point maybe where entering a spiritual journey or getting into certain practices to try to, emphasize, maybe disharmony in ourselves or try to fix that disharmony. And it's funny because when we maybe first approach it, it might seem silly, but the irony is like, this person who maybe tunes their spirit, right,
mm,
tunes their instrument, right, so to speak. They're in there and they're creating an emotional harmony. They're creating a harmony within their life, and then it's ironic because we may sit there and judge them. Meanwhile, we have like, all these like, toxic foods in us. We have
yeah,
indigestion. We have to take we may be like, you might be on a chemical antidepressant to keep your mood elevated.
yeah,
And we're judging someone for doing a practice
yeah,
when we need like chemical assistance to even feel mildly okay.
yeah.
Right. And it
Happy
really
hour.
talks, yeah. And, it talks about the reality that we have to be in control of our bodies. We have to be in control and keep ourselves. I mean, even just to keep your mood elevated is a consistent practice.
Yeah,
Some people pick up a hobby. Some people do this. I mean, for me, it's really about finding purpose. Having purposeful action in your life really drives and keeps your mood elevated. Keeps you something to go towards. I think there's like this ancient Greek tradition phrase. It was like I think by a general or something like that, but he says, without vision, the
mm,
people will perish,
mm,
right? So, in this regard, having something to put yourself towards, for me, it gives you motivation as well as, I kind of guess mood enhancer. Also, when you accomplish those things, you have this kind of intrinsic reward system related to the accomplishment. You kind of, have that mood induced. But I think these practices are just more and more important, especially as we become, farther, as we talked about urbanization and all these other
mm,
things, we become detached from the natural order of things and we find external means, to appease ourselves.
mm.
I mean, in terms of food, maybe even a drug, drugs themselves.
Yeah,
Pornography is even a big issue, I feel like, in
sure.
this country with young people. You know what I mean? Like, there's all sorts of issues that are keeping us, outside of reality in a kind of illusory state. It's really important to come back to your natural person, to your natural relationships, and find harmony in those things. And it starts, right here, from
Mm.
here, to bring you back down to ground. But
Vision, right? This
yeah,
generally, you're talking about vision. So much vision is curated for us, right? Like, and that's
mm,
the part that's wild, is like, how do you know what your vision is if you're not taking time to tap into your own energy? And I'm telling you, like, this is just reality for me for so long, was something outside myself. I think when uh, this COVID 2020 thing happened, it gave me time to be in my own energy. You know, it gave me time to like, you know, there are a lot of shifts that are going on in my life, but it helped me really tap in with me. And as I tapped in with myself, I saw like a lot of the things I thought I wanted or desired or thought were important to me truly weren't. You know what I'm saying? At the end of it, that was all a bit of a, you know, just me being a part of a video game. Like, you know, imagine this. Who was one of the coolest guys I thought growing up, you know, at least like according to movies, James Bond.
Hmm.
What does James Bond really do that is something that where he's tapping in with his own energy? No, he's just getting a mission.
I mean, he's murdering people.
Yeah, he's murdering people
for the state.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? And what is his catchphrase? Shaken, not stirred. You know what I'm saying? Like
he really says that.
Does he say that alcohol, right? Like he talks to a bartender. My thing is like he ain't doing no yoga. He ain't doing no breath work. And I'm not judging him in the sense, but I'm saying like
he's still cool though.
Yeah, he's still cool. Yeah, he's still cool. You know what I'm saying? But like real talk, I don't know if he knows what his own vision is. You know what I'm saying? Because he's just getting orders all day.
I mean, you're a hired gun, right? Yeah, no, I hear that. That's true.
You know what I'm saying? And like, what is his, you know, listen, his day consists of what most men, you know, want, right? You know, I want to party a little bit, want, you know, to get a little, you know, throw a suit on, and I want to kick it to some senoritas and just, you know, not have to deal with them afterwards.
And kick ass.
That's it. That's it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. But yeah, and again, you know, in that sense, highly externalized, you know, moving towards things that are not necessarily serving the self, being a hand of someone else too. Again, as you mentioned, the narratives and these curations, right? We got to come back down to where we see ourselves, right? You know, definitely tapping into, you know, the more holistic nature of reality. And I definitely, you know, we do have a lot of interesting things growing up. You know, we like Sylvester Stallone.
I was about to say Rocky.
These, you know, all these things that, you know, kind of incentivizing violence in a way. But, you know.
Meat. That's what my dudes is meat, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, in the freezer.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Really crazy.
And then they're going to sell it to somebody. Hey, yo, why do you...
Right.
Dude, Commando. Arnold Schwarzenegger, you know what I'm saying? Like, yo, it'd be nice to see a movie where all these guys get together and they like just get in like a drum circle or something, or maybe they get into like, yo, they, you know, why don't they make a band, like a real band with some real music from the heart about what the trauma that they went through in life, you know what I'm saying? Instead of like,
it could be releasing, you know. But yeah, so anyway,
maybe we could do that, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I think we're gonna do a powwow and a drum circle after this, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So anyway, guys, coming back to self, always echoing. You know, come into that intrinsic practice. We talk about that a lot today. So some good stuff. Keep grounded, come back to reality, and maybe have your own conscious endeavor.